What I wish I knew as a beginner plant parent. So this video has actually been on my to-do list for many weeks now, and I actually wasn't planning on filming it today, but I saw some things on Instagram that kind of got me a little bit annoyed, and I thought, while I'm in the mood, let's talk about some things that I wish I knew as a plant parent. I know are not true now, but information that's often circulated on socials, which is where I know a lot of us get our plant care tips from, especially when we're new to plants. So I have quite a long list of topics I wanted to talk about, things that I've learned throughout the years that kind of go against what we're often taught and the information that's often circulated, comments that are often left on people's posts of what's wrong with my plant, what am I doing wrong, and these are often very black and white rules that are pushed on people that in a way kind of make sense, but if you think about it, they don't really make that much sense. And I fully understand that a lot of these tips are geared towards the casual plant parent, people that just put plants in their home to decorate with. They're not really that emotionally invested in them, but they do want to see them grow, and then they see them die or decline and they don't really know why. So a lot of these rules I know are geared towards that, making it really distilled and as simple as possible. But then this snowballs into a lot of people attacking people for not necessarily following these rules. And I always say now that there are very, very, very few rules that can just blanket apply to all types of plant care. And the only thing I can really think of, and only when it's worded a certain way, is that plants need water, plants need light. Everything else I feel like is up for debate. I have a long list of topics. For today, I want to do maybe 3 or 4. I think what I'll do is break this up into maybe a little mini series. And if people want me to talk about certain topics, feel free to leave it in the comments. But these are off the bat ones that I used to follow or I used to believe, and then I've kind of along the way learned a little bit more nuance on the topic, and I am here to tell you what I now know. Okay, we're gonna start off hot. The first one that got me in the mood to make this video today. This is one that Charmaine has asked me to make a couple of times now. She's like, we need someone else talking about this topic because she can't be the one constantly being attacked for it. And if you follow Charmaine, you probably know what's coming. Let's talk about no drainage potting, or the notion that only pots with drainage holes are good for plants and that no drainage potting is a death sentence. When I first started growing plants, I definitely bought into that plants must have drainage or else you're going to get root rot. That was what I believed. I didn't have any reason not to believe it because that's all I used was drainage hole pots. The reason why I went into no drainage potting is because I wanted to use clear vessels where I could see the roots. So the notion here is that plants don't want to sit in water. Stagnant water at the bottom of your pot is going to create this anaerobic environment where bacteria can grow that will cause root rot in your plants. While that is true, there are also huge benefits to no drainage potting, and I'm going to go into some of that. The idea is that you water until water is running out the bottom of the pot and then you're good to go. So there are a couple problems with that when you're thinking about it in such a simple way. We know that a lot of soil media, and especially peat moss, becomes very hydrophobic when it's 100% dry. So watering until you see water at the bottom of the pot is not necessarily going to hydrate your plant because it's completely bypassing the roots. It's running around this brick of dry peat moss, and you're not actually going to water your plant. If your plant was in no drainage and it had become hydrophobic, I actually don't have that many examples to show of plants that I've got growing in no drainage that are in soil specifically. For those of you who kind of follow this channel, my preferred medium lately, at least in the past year and a half, has been pond. But here is one plant that I have in soil and in no drainage. The reason why I don't really pot soil plants in these clear vessels is because these clear vessels are kind of hard to find these days. So I really need this for my pond plants. I can pot a lot of my soil plants in the orchid pots that I have tons of. but these clear glass vessels I kind of reserve for my pond plants. But anyways, here is one example. This is a Dracaena marginata, I think. I'll put the correct name on the screen. It has a little happy face on it to show that it's a happy boy. This is a gift from Charmaine. So this is one that's in soil in no drainage, and it has a LECA drainage layer at the bottom. So there's a way to pot your soil plants in no drainage that prevents root rot. This is where a lot of the water would sit. The roots that have grown into this reservoir are kind of already adapted to sitting in water. So I'm not super concerned of having a reservoir with these kind of plants, but once this soil is super hydrophobic, I can water it, leave that reservoir, and that water is gonna wick up into the soil, hydrate the rest of the root ball. But if this was no drainage, I would either have to bottom water it or water it super slowly and like slowly hydrate that soil until I could feel the weight of the pot and that it was saturated with water and it's actually going to be hydrating the plant. So that's definitely a benefit of no drainage watering. It's a little bit quicker. The thing with no drainage is that you have to water with intention. You have to watch how much you water and when you water, but there are so many benefits to no drainage that drainage holes don't have. The first one is that the roots are all contained in the pot. You don't have roots flying out the bottom, and you also have less of a chance of the plant drying out. So if you are a underwater like I am, no drainage potting is really, really great. Speaking about watering no drainage potting. So this is my Monstera Thai constellation. This is in pond. This is my preferred way to grow a lot of my plants lately. It's been working really well for me, and this Thai has been in this pot for over a year. I'm going to estimate about a year and a half. I have no way of knowing that for sure because I don't post this plant on Instagram a lot, so I can't really look back, but I believe it's been at least 1 year where I cut this plant and then rooted the top cutting in this vessel. So you'll see that it's extremely well rooted in this pot. I've got roots coming out the top here already. It's well overdue for a repot, but it's been doing quite well in this pot. It's a slow grower, but it definitely grows for me. So this plant is now in need of a water. Let me just show you how I would water this plant. All right, so as I mentioned before, when you're rooting a plant in no drainage and you have, okay, my hands are full. Where do I put this? Okay, don't spill, please. Don't spill. Okay, so when you're rooting a plant in no drainage, the roots that circle around at the bottom of the vessel are more adapted to sitting in water for a little bit of time, not forever, but for a little bit of time. So definitely when you're transitioning a plant from drainage into no drainage, especially if it's soil, I would definitely leave a reservoir at the bottom and allow roots to acclimate to that environment. This plant has been acclimated to grow in no drainage, so I'm not too worried about the roots at the bottom sitting in water. So what I would do to water it is I would slowly go around and get water everywhere. Now I have a little bit of water forming at the bottom, but it's maybe like 2 millimeters right now, so I'm gonna keep going until I have about 1 inch of water at the bottom. If you can see, I don't know if you can see, let me put this down. So the water line is about right here at the moment. I'm not going to presume that me watering it that way would have hydrated all the little bits in the substrate. So what is going to happen over the next 24 hours is that this water is going to move into all the perlite, the bark in this pond mix. And then by tomorrow, this whole thing will just be moist and this reservoir is pretty much going to be gone. What I can't do in no drainage is water without really like inspecting the moisture levels in the substrate. It's not impossible, but I prefer not to do no drainage without a clear pot. I just prefer not to have all of that guesswork when I'm watering a plant. I want to be able to see it. Okay, it needs water, that's enough, done. I have a lot of plants. I don't want to spend too much time. My watering days, I want to get it over as quickly as possible, and it gets really hot in this room, so the more I fuss with it, the more hot I get, the more irritated I get. So this is how I've learned to water my plants, how I learned to pot my plants, so I know exactly how much to water. And it's really like going back to watering with intention. Like when people are saying like no drainage potting is a death sentence for your plants will get root rot if you pot in no drainage, it's just not true. It will get root rot if you don't take the time to learn how to water. So if that's not for you, and if it's not something that you feel like is something you really want to like think about, watering slowly, watering only where the plant needs water, specifically targeting the parts of the pot that need water, and like knowing where to water, if that's not something you want to invest your mental energy on, then of course drainage pots would work well for you. I'm not saying that drainage potting is wrong. That's definitely not wrong. I plant in drainage all the time, but there are so many benefits to no drainage potting that drainage potting doesn't offer me. Repotting a plant becomes so much easier. If I were to take this plant out of this pot, it would just be like one cylinder. I can loosen the roots a little bit, and then, or I could just leave it the way it is, pot it into a new pot, and the roots will kind of just find their way. I don't really need to loosen the roots unless I was changing the substrate completely. But with drainage pots, those roots always find their ways through those slits and holes and get stuck, and you have to rip these roots, and either you cut the pot, which can be really difficult because these pots are really, really thick, or you rip some of the roots, and repotting just becomes that much more time consuming. So that's one huge thing. Some plants actually prefer no drainage, in my opinion. I have alocasias mostly in no drainage because you also have to think about where these plants are found growing, right? So alocasias, colocacias, a lot of them are found growing near to water. They're used to sitting in a certain level of water, and they actually thrive that way. So the alocasias that I have that do the best are all in no drainage with a water reservoir. I try never to let these pots completely dry out because they really do show it. Might as well put this down. I'll show you another one. So this is my Alocasia Frydek. This I showed fairly recently, just put out this stunning new leaf. It is in pond with no drainage in this pot. So the thing about alocasias is that they root like crazy. Like those roots grow at an alarming speed, and if I had drainage on this pot, I'd be repotting it like once a month because those roots would just find its way out. So I'd either be lifting the pot and adding more substrate in, or I'd be losing these roots or snapping them off when I'm trying to pull them out of these drainage holes. It doesn't really make any sense for me to pot them in drainage because I know that they kind of enjoy sitting in a little bit of water. This alocasia has been growing for me in pond since the day I got it. It was a corm that was rooting in pond. It sprouted in pond. It's been a little cup with pond, then a medium cup with pond, big pot with pond, and it just freaking loves it. When I was growing the green version in soil, it didn't enjoy it as much as it did pond. So it is growing a lot faster in pond. It's nowhere near as nice as this. I'm not even gonna bother showing you the green version. Here's another example of a benefit of no drainage is if you're growing alocasias, they freaking love it. Granted, I haven't tried no drainage with soil with alocasias. Soil is just not my go-to medium for alocasias, so I've never tried that. If you've tried it, let me know. I imagine it would do fine. I've seen people do it and their alocasias look really, really healthy in soil and no drainage. I also want to just show you a plant that doesn't necessarily grow in like swampy conditions like alocasias normally do. All right, here's a little double whammy. This is also a little growth update on my philodendron serpens. I showed this and I repotted it in my coffee chats video. I got it from moss into pond. I put it in no drainage and I got it on a moss pole. So these were the leaves on it when I repotted it. It immediately dropped the lowest leaf when I moved it. I think it was throwing a bit of a fit, and then it got a little bit of these crispy tips because I lost some roots during the repot. Here's the other leaf on the plant, one of the original leaves. And then after that, it put out a leaf that was smaller. And now look at the newest leaf on this. This is a plant that is a climber. It grows up a tree, hence the moss pole. When we're talking about epiphytes, which a lot of our aroids are, they're growing up trees, they're growing up cliffs, they're growing on things, they're attaching themselves to structures and then getting the rain runoff from them, where like in the rainforest it's raining like every day, and then they get nutrients from the decay and the bark runoff from the host plants. So when we're thinking about that, it probably doesn't want to sit in water all the time, and that's where we come back to watering with intention. Watering where the plant needs it. Don't give it too much. Remember that stagnant water over a period of time will develop anaerobic bacteria. That's where root rot comes from. But then also, if you're thinking about it, it also just means that beneficial bacteria within your substrate is really, really advantageous. It will help outcompete these harmful bacteria, help break down dead matter and turn that back into nutrients for the plant. It's just a good, nice little biosphere in your pot. So this has been a no drainage for, when would I have made that video? Maybe like 3 months ago. We got roots kind of circling the bottom here now. We're not going to talk about the moss pole. The topic is not moss poles right now. What I'm trying to say is that like no drainage potting has been great for this plant with the addition of the moss pole. I'm not saying that no drainage potting made this plant healthier. That's not what I'm saying, but you can see that it's a healthy plant. So one last thing I want to touch on with no drainage potting is that a lot of the, I'm gonna call it fear mongering for lack of a better word. A lot of the people who are creating little like sassy, scary care tips like don't do this, don't be an idiot, use drainage holes. A lot of these people are preaching the dangers of salt buildup with no drainage potting. You need drainage holes in order to flush the plant of all these salts that end up building up over time. While I don't disagree with that, I still have yet to experience salt buildups with plants. This is my Philodendron Dean McDowell. This has been inside this no drainage pot. I'm going to look back to when I imported this plant because it's been in this pot since I got it. This is actually the pot that I acclimated this plant in when I got it in. So I'll look up the date and I'll put it right here of how long this plant has been in this pot. I've never done a flush with it. I fertilize with every watering, not very strongly, but there is fertilizer, and I don't see salt buildup on this plant. It's still growing happily. So while I'm not saying that salt buildup cannot happen and that salt buildup wouldn't be detrimental to your plant, I'm also saying that like I haven't experienced it yet with no drainage potting. It's even with a plant that's been in the same pot for over a year, being fed fertilizer with every watering. I also recently showed my Philodendron Nancri Tense in my May favorites. That one had been in that pot for even longer than this one, I think. So I'm gonna guess that one's been in that pond pot for like 2 years. I know this because that plant is in pure lechuza pond without any additives. I don't even think I had any leca in there. I could be wrong, but I've been adding leca and perlite to my pond to lighten it up for so long that the fact that that one doesn't have any perlite in it tells me it's been a really long time. And that one is, as you can see in that video, is doing really, really great. Not showing any signs of salt buildup. Huxley's coming to join us. You gotta be quiet, okay, if you're gonna be in here. And you can't knock over the tripod, please. So the salt buildup thing, oh no. Huxley, you can't go there, okay? So the salt buildup thing, I haven't experienced. I am trying to do some I am trying to do some research on it. I've kind of gone through some scholarly articles about salt buildup, also how bacteria can kind of play a part in fixing those issues. I haven't found any definitive answers, but I'll continue to research it, and if I find anything, I'll definitely let you know. So anyways, the point of this whole sentence is that I wish I had done no drainage potting sooner. I wish I hadn't spent so much money on orchid pots. I wish I had purchased more glass vessels when they were easier to find. So that's a learning I've had. I wish I knew that sooner. I wish I had someone telling me, here are the benefits of no drainage potting, but the caveats are this. You need to watch how much you water. You can't just water on a schedule. You have to assess the moisture content in the substrate and then water with intention. Oh, isn't it so cute when they do that?
That's so cute, Huxley.
And I wish I'd been potting with clear vessels from the start and not collecting so many of these useless, they're not useless, these colorful pots that like don't go together, but they look really cute on the shelf. And then I wish I hadn't spent so much money on it, because that would have been more plant money, right? Okay, off you go. So really what I want to say about it is that no drainage is not a death sentence for your plant. I know why people make these reels and these care guides for plants that like preach drainage holes and nothing else. Drainage holes are the only way forward. I know why they do it, because it reaches a wider audience, and it reaches a wider audience, and essentially it's just for the views, and that's really it. And I find it a little bit cheap. But then again, like I said, I know that it's created for the casual plant parent, but then the issue I have with it is that it becomes gospel, and it's not gospel. It shouldn't be gospel. Drainage holes have their purpose, but it's not the only way. I'm also not saying that like no drainage is better than drainage holes. It is often my preferred way of potting, because like I said, I've been potting a lot of plants in pond. I'll just show you one more. This is my preferred way to pot plants now, in a glass vessel. And if it can't be glass, then like a plastic cup with pond. It looks clean, everything is clear. I don't need to lift plants up to check the weight of them to know whether or not it needs water. I can just simply look at the side of the pot. This Luxurians has been loving this new repot with the great white in the pond. It's not doing that like halo yellowing thing anymore. So this leaf has been fully hardened for a while. This new leaf has gotten a lot bigger. It's finally happy, I think. Knock on wood. I think it's finally happy. So if you can't already tell, I was very annoyed this morning when I saw a reel basically saying that like you're silly or you're stupid for potting that plants that way. And like, again, I know why they create that content, and I find it misleading, because at the end of the day it's misinformation if you're not giving the full information. One last view of this leaf before I put it back. I freaking love this Luxurians. All right, the next thing I want to talk about is misting. Again, I know why this is circulated. I get why it's circulated. Misting plants is beautiful. It looks very therapeutic. It's so zen. You see a lot of people like misting their plants, and then they talk about why they do it, which is to increase the humidity around their plants. It's not really true though. There are ways to use misting that are amazing. They're wonderful. They've helped me so much in my plant journey. But in the beginning, I really believed that like misting my plants is going to increase the humidity of them. But as it turns out, it doesn't actually increase the humidity. You just wet the leaf for 15 minutes and it dries out again. So like if I just mist plants like this, by the time I finish filming this video, it's probably going to be dry again. So misting really does increase the humidity when you have a greenhouse. So if I were to mist inside this EXO, it'd probably still be wet tomorrow morning, which isn't like good and bad. Like I don't really do it that much in this EXO unless I leave the doors open, because the fungal issues in there really do kind of like get exacerbated with the fungal issues, especially with these velvety anthuriums, really do get accelerated with like continuous wetness in the air. But I do it sometimes when I'm foliar feeding. So foliar feeding is a great way to use misting. So I really don't want to lift it up. Fine, I'll do it for the video. I just filled this yesterday. This is my 2-gallon mister that I got from Home Depot. This is like the Home Depot brand. And this is what I use to water a lot of my plants. Not all of them, but my plants that are in smaller pots. So I like watering with this because I can fill this whole tank with my my fertilizer cocktail, and then I can reach into like little nooks and crannies in my grow tent. I can direct the watering because it comes out kind of like a jet mist. It's easy to water small pots this way, but I don't like it for watering big pots because I'm just like standing there forever, just like wanting to die, waiting for the pot to be finished. I use this a lot also for foliar feeding. So the same exact mix that I would use to water my plants, I just spray it over the plants. There are times of the day to do this. I prefer to do it during daylight hours during the day because I find that the plants will absorb the nutrients better when their stomata are open during the day and they kind of close at night. This is a great way to use misting. Another great way to use misting is when a leaf is coming out of the sheath and it's getting stuck because the humidity is too low, or it's a plant that just likes getting stuck. Pink princess. Let me see if I can find an example for you. All right, so this is not the best example, but it is an example. This is my Philodendron Borley Marks Fantasy that does need a repot desperately, but here we have a leaf that's slightly stuck in the petiolar sheath. This sheath where the leaf comes out of the petiole, usually when the growth is still juvenile, eventually it will transition to cataphyll production. And by cataphyll production, I mean like this is a gloriosum that has cataphyll growth now. So the newest growth is right here. It's its own standalone cataphyll. It's not emerging out of the petiole of the leaf before it. So these are just two ways that leaves can emerge. I'm sure you all know that. The cataphyll and the petiolar sheath have this like sticky lining on the inside. I believe it's called mucilage. I could be wrong, but I've heard it called that. I remember it because mucilage is a really, really important part of coffee processing. But anyway, so it's really sticky, and when the conditions are slightly on the drier side, then this stickiness is kind of dried up and therefore creates a lot of friction with the leaf coming out. So that's why it bends on itself like this. So you can see at the very tip of here, this leaf tip is trapped inside this petiolar sheath. So what I'm gonna do with the mister is, it's gonna be in focus. I feel like I only have one shot of this. I'm gonna just mist that. Oh, a little bit of water gone on Huxley. Okay, so then now that this is wet, I can let it soak for a little bit or massage it in. And then I can probably, it's gonna be really hard to do it up to the camera. I can now just lift it out. But without the misting, it wouldn't soften that mucilage layer and it would just break the leaf. And this is exactly what happened to this queen. You can see the rips on here. I didn't get to misting it on time and it ripped itself coming out of the sheath because that mucilage layer was just like stuck to the leaf and it wasn't releasing the leaf. So that's one really great use for misting that I use all the time when I remember. What I wish I knew when I first started is misting the plants just for humidity purposes. It's kind of a waste of time unless it's in a greenhouse. But if it's just out in my open living room, I'm not really going to be doing much for it. But using a mister to free leaf sheaths, using a mister for foliar feeding. Foliar feeding is something I haven't been doing for like that long. I would say probably like less than half of my plant journey. Those are the ways that misting can be really beneficial. And I think that foliar feeding is generally overlooked and can be so beneficial to epiphytes. Plants that most of us are growing. If you're watching my channel, you're probably growing a lot of aroids because that's all I show. But these plants that are growing up trees, and especially if we have them on moss poles, if they're only getting their nutrients from the pot, you're missing a lot of opportunities to feed these plants. If you're feeding the leaves themselves, and getting feed into the moss pole, that's going to really, really boost the nutrient uptake of that plant. And just as something that I learned a while ago is that the leaves actually have a higher potential for nutrient uptake compared to the roots. It's just that there's just like little windows throughout the day where it would actually be receptive to the nutrients. When the stomata are closed, they're not actually going to be taking nutrients in. Again, similar to watering with no drainage, misting with intention is actually how it should be. Target your misting. Hex, stop! Dad just came home. Go see Dad. Go see. Go see Daddy. Go! I'm gonna poke your butt. Is that it for misting? I don't actually think that a pebble tray really increases the ambient humidity around a plant. If there's data that supports that, then feel free to leave in the comments. I've never personally tried pebble trays. I was kind of intrigued by it at the beginning, but I just never got around to it. Okay, it's been 55 minutes. Let's do one more. Which one should I do? Okay, I'll leave one of these for the next video. But this one I do want to talk about because it pertains to the watering and humidity and stuff like that. So, chunky aeroid mix. This is something that was talked about a lot and it was circulated a lot. It was talked about a lot on YouTube. Is that because aeroids are mostly epiphytes growing up trees, growing not in the ground, a lot of the aeroids that are in cultivation that were being traded a lot, that were really popular at the time, the ones that are climbers and grow up trees, and they don't actually grow in soil, and they're used to a lot of airflow around the roots because a lot of the roots are exposed, and therefore a really chunky mix is ideal for the plant so that the roots get airflow because they're more prone to rotting. They're not kind of adapted to growing in a very dense substrate. While that is true, I'm not here to dispute that whatsoever. It is true that aeroids prefer a chunkier mix where air can get through the pots. But there was like this point in time where people were really pushing like the chunkiness on people. Like, I don't know if this is still the case, but there was a point in time where people were like, more chunk, not chunky enough, not chunky enough, not chunky enough, make it more chunky. And it was getting to the point where like people were just using like pure bark and bark, perlite, cocoa chunks, and nothing else. And I'm not saying that's wrong. It's not wrong. There's nothing that's technically wrong across the board. Really, I can't really think of anything that's just like wrong. But you have to assess yourself and your growing conditions and your kind of parenting habits to assess how chunky you should go, right? There's like chunky and there's like super chunky. And there are people that are like, there was someone that left a comment on Charmaine's channel. I don't remember what video it was, but Charmaine did mention this, that like, they're like, your soil mix is wrong. Aeroids want to be growing in pure bark. Define wrong. And then the people who are newer to plants, they read this and they're like almost intimidated into like putting as much chunk as possible. Here's what I've grown to learn. I really did make these like crazy chunky mixes at the beginning. I spent a lot of money on amendments because bark is more expensive by volume compared to soil. And I was pretty much doing soilless mediums with like almost pure amendments, and it did work for me for a little bit, but it didn't really work for me that well. And the reason is because like if you're growing in like almost pure bark, you're watering like every other day. That's crazy. That's crazy. For someone like me, that's crazy. I'm not going to be doing that. I don't have the time to do that. Back then I kind of did because we were like kind of in lockdown and I could afford the time to water my plants all the time, almost every day. There's no way I could do that now. I can barely keep up with once a week. Barely. And a lot of my plants are drying out even with that kind of schedule. Here are a few things that I wish I knew. I wish I knew I had to really take the time to assess my growing conditions before I really choose a substrate. So when you're potting something in a denser, more water retentive substrate, if your plant is in really warm, well-lit, bright conditions, then it's going to take up water quicker. And this is probably going to do just fine in that kind of soil mix. But if you are growing your plant in a greenhouse, it's really warm, bright light, really good conditions for the plant, and you have a really highly chunky mix that doesn't retain water that much, and you don't get to the water all the time, your plant's also going to suffer. I wish I knew that I shouldn't just blindly follow a aeroid mix recipe. I really had to tailor that recipe to my conditions and my watering habits. Of course, there is like a minimal level of grit that your soil needs to have in order for it to not rot. You have to have like very specific conditions in order to grow aroids in like pure peat moss. Like a lot of nurseries do that because peat moss is so water retentive. So growing a lot of plants this way means they save money on irrigation and they have all the light and warmth for the plants to still grow under those conditions. Most of us don't have those conditions. I would always advocate a level of amendments, but I would never give someone a recipe and say that this is the one that works and that they should do it. I would always preface that by saying, okay, so like what are the conditions it's living in? Are they under grow lights? Is it really warm? The temperature? What's the humidity like? All of that should kind of play into how many amendments, what kind of amendments, and what works for someone is not necessarily going to work for you. Yeah. And once again, I know why people make this content. It's really beautiful to see this like soil get mixed and stuff. And I'm not like saying that that's bad content to make, but saying someone's wrong for deviating from that recipe, I don't agree with. So I wish I knew that. I wish I had experimented more with my soil mix and changed things when things weren't really working out for me. And I wish I had gotten around to changing things sooner when I was going to be getting busier, getting less diligent with the watering and so on. So I wish I had just not listened so much to these like bros with rules at the beginning of my plant journey and been intimidated into growing my plants a certain way because they're like so aggressive with telling people they're wrong for things. And you're like, oh, they're really passionate about this. They must know what they're talking about and I better not look like an idiot. I don't want to look like an idiot, so I'm just gonna make my soil mix completely chunky and that's probably going to solve all my problems, and then I'll have plants that look like his plants. Okay, I think that about wraps up this video. I hope you enjoyed this video. I was hoping to make this video a little bit more polished, but like I said, I got in a mood this morning. If there's more that you guys want me to talk about, please feel free to leave it in the comments. And I hope like no one gets upset over anything I said in this video. Once again, I'm not saying anyone is wrong. I'm just saying that there's a lot of misinformation out there that doesn't necessarily give people enough information around growing plants. And you kind of like feed all these plant growing rules for the casual plant grower. That's fine and dandy, but a lot of those casual plant growers then turn into hobbyists and they're part of plant communities and they discuss things. And I think that it's healthy to have a little bit of a different perspective on a lot of these like plant care rules, which aren't necessarily wrong, but they're not necessarily totally right either. So anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you didn't get angry about it, please remember to give it a thumbs up. I don't know what next week's video is going to be. I know next weekend we're going to North Shore Tropicals again because it's the Tropicals Equiflora pop-up. I don't know how much I'll film there. Maybe I'll do like, I don't know, repot with me kind of thing. I'm not really sure what that weekend's gonna look like, but I will see you back here next week for another video. I hope you have a great rest of your weekend and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.